you
tough
would tell
questions.
Joyce.
I've never met you guys before, so I was going to be nice.
Appreciate it, thank you.
But the shoreline reporting has been good. I know that there's been a number of reporters that have, you know, come in and reported on shoreline issues, and then they say, I'm a New Haven registered reporter, and then I think, oh, this is the person I'm going to get to know and establish a relationship with, and then there's, you know, I don't know what the nature of the news business is, but I guess they graduate to covering like more important issues or something in New Haven.
I don't know if it's more important, but yeah, some of them have graduated.
So anyway, no, but I think that the paper's done a good job at really reporting on the issues from the shoreline. So, so I had actually have been keeping a list of the issues that I would like to raise. So I mean, since I have I brought a couple of copies of, I don't know whether I have copies for everybody, but I think this would help maybe guide our discussion a little bit of the types of issues that we will address in the Environment Committee. But let me just make a couple of introductory remarks, because the Environment Committee was my #1 choice after I was elected. As you may know, I came to New Haven as a student at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. So I went to Wesleyan undergrad, went to Boston for a few years, worked in a disability advocacy organization, and then decided I really wanted to focus on environmental factors that lead to disease and disability. So when I think of environment, I really think of not just, you know, preserving open space and wildlife preservation and whatnot. I'm really thinking of, in fact, after I graduated from the forestry school, I spent several years working on an urban environmental issue of pediatric lead poisoning, which I know the Register reported on a lot, and starting kind of an housing intervention, disease intervention program for what I think is the #1 environmental justice issue, which is pediatric lead poisoning, because it disproportionately impacts, you know, poor kids in New Haven. So when I had the opportunity, and when Marty Looney, who's the Senate President, asked, you know, what would be my preference, it was really easy for me to make that decision. And obviously, the environment is a very important issue for people living on the shoreline, with, of course, the proximity of Long Island Sound, the agricultural issues, farmland preservation and the like, historic preservation, you know, that comes under the Community Investment Act, which is, you know, interfaces a lot with environmental affairs, clean water. And to me, it's really one of the critical selling points of our state. As we're facing a lot of challenges in our state, to me, having these assets and having, you know, community of people, both Democrat and Republican, who are really invested in preserving and protecting our environmental assets is really important. So, you know, we run the committee, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, 24 bills made it out of this committee, and I'm told that was quite an accomplishment given last year's all the, you know, the budget issues that we were facing and a lot of contention that was in the legislature. It was my first term, so I had really nothing to judge it against, but we really work in a very collaborative way. My ranking member, Clark Chapin, who's unfortunately decided to not seek re-election this year, but he has served on the Environment Committee both in the House and in the Senate, and nearly all of what we do is done in a very bipartisan and collaborative way. And one of the reasons why we were so successful in getting so many bills out, there's a few more that we can talk about here that passed one chamber but not the other, because we ran out of time at the very end because of the way we do our budgeting, which is at the very last minute, which is another issue. So that's the kind of way I like to work with the committee members, is really try to speak to all the members of the committee and figure out like what we can do together working as a team. So most of the work that we do is bipartisan, unanimous or near unanimous. So you have a list of some of the issues that we passed last time, but what I've just been working kind of on a running list of the types of issues that we expect to raise this year. And if you want, I can just, would it be helpful? I don't know, I can answer questions, or I can kind of run through kind of the types of issues that, with that.
Maybe, I mean, obviously would hear about all of them, but a couple of them jump out at me right away. Not only the harbor dredging one, but the pollinator health one, which obviously is a really important issue, and I have yet to, I haven't seen any stories about that in terms of the state taking that up.
Well, the pollinators are, essentially bees that pollinate and are responsible for the crop production around the United States and in Connecticut. We've lost half of the pollinators in our state over the last several years, and there's multiple factors. There's habitat loss. There's applications of these neonics, which is a type of pesticide that has now been banned by the Ninth Circuit, the federal court out in California. But there are a number of pesticides that are used, that are applied to flowering trees and crops that impact bees and other pollinators. So this is an important issue because Connecticut has a long agricultural history, and in my district, people don't realize how important that it is. When you think about, in Branford, North Branford, Guilford has a long history of, agriculture and farms like Bishop's Orchards and others that rely on bees to pollinate their fruit trees and others. So when these, when there's a problem with the bees, it's going to impact agriculture adversely. So when we think about pollinator health, there's several different approaches, and again, many of these ideas aren't fully formed, but I'll just give you a flavor of the types of things that we're thinking about encouraging habitat for honeybees, like certain types of plants that can be planted adjacent to fields that can serve as a habitat for honeybees in between the flowering season. So the idea here is that to have certain types of fruits and vegetables, they pollinate at different times during the year, and to have a place where essentially the bees can hang out in the interim, in between the time that they're pollinating the different species of fruits and vegetables. Another thing would be to look at what we can do to really investigate the overuse of harmful pesticides on honeybees. So we had, and I know you covered it, the environmental forum that we hosted in the 12th district. We had a number of people who are expert beekeepers and came from the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station to really talk about what are the key issues and what we need to think about.
Is it really established why bees are dying off? Is it pesticides mostly, or?
Well, I think I can't, from what I'm gathering, and again, one of the reasons why we have introduced legislation and have public hearings is, believe it or not, I mean, a lot of people think that when you have a public hearing that, the legislators have already kind of made up their mind and they're using the information selectively to kind of bolster their viewpoint. But I'm very, I think that people, at least on the Environment Committee, really keep an open mind. And a lot of times you hear testimony from people that are being impacted that really changes your mind about the direction that we really need to go on certain types of issues. So, for example, in honeybees, I think there is the assumption that certain types of pesticides contribute to this colony collapse disorder. what's called colony collapse disorder. And again, Connecticut has experienced it, other states have experienced it. Obviously, we look to what other states have also done because we can learn from legislative activity in other states, so we'll be looking at that. And really speaking to farmers, to people like, Ciccarelli Farm in North Branford, or the Bishops who have been running, a farm for, multiple generations, because that really informs us about what, we need to do.
But bees are dying off all over the world, aren't they? I mean, it's become a major.
It's become a major,
right.
yeah, it's become a major problem.
So
yes.
across the world, is it pesticides, or because it was my understanding that we don't know, and that's the big problem.
There's a mite that kills bees too. It's called the varroa mite, and it gets into the colonies, and that's another issue that.
That's another issue. I think it's not just the pesticides that impact the bees that are insects. Obviously, you're spraying for insects, and bees are insects, so it interrupts their reproductive system and a number of their different. There's an expression called a beeline, and the beeline is straight from the flower to the hive. And they've looked at. I didn't know. I'm just admitting. I didn't know how this expression. I just learned about this, and they've observed these bees after they've applied certain types of chemicals and pesticides, and the bees do not make a beeline back to their hive anymore. I mean, there are, because they've been exposed to these types of chemicals. Again, I think we need to look at all the different causes, not jump to any conclusions, but really try to understand and then what we can do, in a reasonable way to help promote, bee habitat, etc. But it's an important issue because, as I said, agriculture is an important component of our economy here in the state.
Thank you.
So you had the environmental summit a month or so ago.
Yes.
Hasn't been a lot of time, especially with the holidays mixed in. But what do you see coming out of that? Like, what's the next step from that?
Well, as you may know, we had like 4 panels. We had to cover like all environmental issues in like a 2-hour period. So it was really, in some ways, just kind of scratching the surface. But part of the goal of the conference was to get people together from across the shoreline who are working on similar issues. For example, land trust issues. There were people in Madison and Branford and Guilford Land Trust, North Branford Land Trust, who are all working to preserve open space and who had never met each other. So I think it was part of it was to try to encourage kind of networking around common types of issues. But one of the issues, primary issues, is this issue of packaging waste that I know the paper has covered, and that's what we can do about that. There's several different things that we have in mind. I don't know. I don't have a bill all written, ready to go, but it could take a number of forms that we can talk about that. Consumer packaging, that's and not only is there a general sense that we just are, the amount of consumer packaging as a result of online purchases are clogging people's, front hallways. The transfer stations are filling up with bubble wrap, peanuts, excess packaging material, and that's costing our cities and towns a lot of extra money because they have to pay for the disposal of packing waste, and it's just wasteful. A lot of packaging is just wasteful. So we are looking to do a number of different things in that area. So that would be one issue. The pollinator issue you spoke about. We had a panel on animal welfare. The Environment Committee has jurisdiction over both domestic and wild animals. There's a number of issues that we'll be taking up this current term. I point you to where is this?
Animal abuser registry?
Well, the Animal Abuser Registry, there's actually a task force now being convened that's been underway for about a year or two, is that?
I think so, yeah.
With Mike Frieda, is that?
I don't know exactly how long, but that sounds right.
Yeah, so the issue is, one of the issues is penalties for intentional cruelty to animals. About 80% of all people who are, are identified as animal abusers get away scot-free. They are offered accelerated rehabilitation, which may or may not be appropriate. The problem is that several people are offered AR on a repeated basis, and animal abusers are, there's a lot of evidence that these people go on to injure other people later on in their life, and it's a pathological problem. And not only is it terrible for the animals, but we're not intervening as a state. So we did pass tightening up the penalties for animal abuse. It passed the Senate, I think, near unanimous. I can look it up.
I think it was unanimous.
Was it unanimous? Yeah. But again, it died in the House because we just ran out of time. So to me, that's something where during a short session, we don't have to socialize, a whole new idea. And let me just say, part of the, of course I'm just a new member of the legislature. So, I observe a lot of things that can be done that I think would dramatically increase the efficiency of our legislative process. And one of them would be to allow these bills to be carried over from one session to the next, similar to the way it's done in U.S. Congress. So, for example, we know that the increasing penalties for animal abuse passed the Senate. Now, why should we have to then repass that bill? Why couldn't it be? It's the same members of the legislature, right? It's the same group of people. Why can't then that just have a 2-year period in which we're elected to go straight to the House, so we don't have to go through this whole rigmarole of having additional hearings on this particular question?
I don't think I've ever heard anybody suggest that before.
Yeah,
Well, that
In Connecticut, anyway.
Well,
I didn't know that that was the way it was done.
That's
If the
really
bill
interesting.
died,
That's-
when you come back, I thought it was just brought up again. I didn't know you
No.
had to
No, you have to
reintroduce it.
reintroduce it at the committee level. It has to, even though it passed unanimously in the Senate, it then has to come back. We have to bring all the people who testified before back to Hartford.
Doesn't make any sense.
No, it does not. And and the same with the tire recycling bill. That passed unanimously for the Senate, died in the House. There was no vote ever taken. It was, clearly would have passed the chamber had we just had more time. But that's another example, and I'm sure there's many, many, many examples. It's not a very efficient way to run the state government.
Is this something are you introducing something to try to address that?
You mean change the rules?
Yeah,
of the? I've spoken about issues like that before. I don't think I think that there's probably a reason why people do that. The rules are adopted by both chambers prior to the last year. We have to re-adopt the rules again. One of the things that I've been frustrated by, and that many of my constituents have been frustrated by, is why we wait until the last minute to do the budget bill. That the House was up. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking because I want to concentrate on the environmental issues, but there's a process called e-certification. And emergency are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And if you look at the statute, it anticipates that when there's some natural disaster or there's an emergency that our state is facing that allows a bill, which normally has to go through a committee process and deliberation and conversation and give and take, bypass that and go straight to the floor. So under an e-certification process, you can waive all those rules, and essentially, as legislators, we're presented with, a 700-page document, less than 24 hours before we're asked to vote on that document. And what you've found is, in the budget session, the budget, which is the most important document that we have to undertake as a legislature, the House was up all night long, had to vote at like 4:30 in the morning. The Senate then takes up the bill 6:30 at night. Okay, of the night we have a midnight deadline, and we're just starting to debate the budget at 6:30 at night. And no one can tell me that that's a good way to make decisions at the final moment when people really don't have an opportunity to comment on those bills. So there's a lot of rules changes that I think would improve the legislative process, but these are just my observations, because people in my district wonder, why is it that we can't, make these decisions in a more deliberative way? And then what you do is you find out that there's a lot of things in those bills that really people are unaware of, or there's a lot of surprises, like the unitary tax provision that was in there, or the tax on ambulatory surgery centers, the 6% tax on ambulatory surgery centers, that they woke up the next morning and found out that there are these, significant taxes or regulations impacting industries that they had no idea. So anyway, that's another rule that I think, and other states have looked and said that you can't offer things like you can't pass a budget using the e-cert process, for example, because we know that in less than 2 years from now, we're going to have to pass another budget. Okay, this is not a mystery. It's an emergency of our own making, in other words, when we wait until the very last minute. That's just...
And then end up with a special session anyway.
And then end up with a special session. So anyway...
We've always done it that way.
What?
Yeah.
We've always done it that
It's
way.
always been
That's the reason.
I don't know whether we've always done it that way.
Almost always. It's almost
Long
So
always.
before you go back to the environment, are you going to suggest or introduce something to?
Well, I've
But,
spoken
so
about
you
it. I've spoken
constituents-
about it, and I think that there is a sense from a number of my colleagues that why do we do this? I think the people who've said that we've always done it are the people who've been there a long time, and then there's freshmen like me who come in and are wondering why we're doing this at the last minute, and I think it's part of the rules process, and that's what you would have to make it. You'd have to make changes to to the rules, the way the legislature functions. I don't know what kind of appetite there is to try to do that.
Circling back to the packaging issue.
Yes.
Is this came up a bit last night, because James actually wrote an editorial, supporting this thing that we ran today. I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet.
I haven't had a chance
It
to
just,
see-
by coincidence that you happen to be here.
Did you? I haven't seen it yet. I'm sorry. I usually read the paper. Does it sound strange when at the end of the day I get into bed and I am a subscriber to the New Haven.
Oh, I know, I can tell. Well, my question is, and this kind of came up a little bit last night from one of the editors who was reading your editorial, James, is all of that waste that's going into these transfer stations,
Yes.
is the issue that people aren't taking the time to recycle it? I mean, like cardboard would typically be recyclable.
Yes.
Is it that people just aren't bothering, or is it an education thing in addition to a packaging thing?
Well, it's a couple of things. It's not really the primary packaging around. Say, for example, you buy a tube of toothpaste and there's a little cardboard box that the tube comes in.
Right.
It's not that, but if you order a tube of toothpaste online, it comes in a box that's substantially bigger, and then it contains a lot of the packing material, right? So it's not uncommon. My wife had some car repairs done just yesterday, and the owner of the car shop said, I heard that your husband was trying to do something, and then he lamented the fact that gets parts shipped from all over the country, and the amount just of excess, waste. So there's the packaging material. It's creating a problem for the consumer, right? Because the consumer is stuck now and has to then make a trip to the transfer station, number one. Number two is the trucks that we're fortunate in Branford, we actually have, single stream recycling in Branford. Not every town has that. Other people in other towns have to, like in Killingworth or Durham, there's no curbside, trash
I make a
pickup.
run of the dump every Saturday.
But what town do you live in?
Killingworth.
Killingworth. Then I go to Killingworth. I don't know. Have we met at the dump? I'm usually there. I'm usually there. Then somebody told
Why do
me,
you go to Killingworth?
That's the place.
why?
That's
Me
That's
too.
when you're running for office. You
Yes.
got to go to the Killingworth dump.
If it's October.
That's a new one.
Do you see all the politicians standing out there?
It's a gauntlet every
It's
October.
It's a gauntlet. Yeah.
They
you're-
do that orange too. My husband hates it.
Well, yeah, so you have to, and then of course, the towns have to pay for the disposal of a lot of this packaging waste. So it's actually the packers and the manufacturers and the shippers are essentially offloading that cost to towns like Killingworth that have to pay extra money in dealing with all this extra waste. So they're being charged for the removal of this waste.
But if I dutifully take the box and throw it in the cardboard recycling
Well, the
bin,
cardboard may be one thing, but not all not all this material is, recyclable material. Like the plastic peanuts or the other types of, bags that are in there. It's just a lot of excess material. So, look, we're looking at, Connecticut has set a goal to try to reduce their municipal solid waste. That goal is going to be, by 60% by 2024, I think. That goal is going to be really hard to achieve due to this, increase online. Now everybody is buying stuff, and the UPS person is showing up at their house and just these boxes and boxes and boxes. So, in fact, I've heard anecdotally. Now, I don't know whether this is like off the record or whatever. I don't want to profess that this is a fact, okay? But I've heard anecdotally that UConn, the post office at the University of Connecticut, used to be just, regular post office where students would go pick up their mail. Now they have like this football field size, room, because all the students are ordering everything online, and they're just, have you heard this?
No, I've heard it because my girlfriend's young sister just is a freshman in college, and they were saying the exact same thing, because if you want to buy a chair for your dorm room or something, it's easier probably to order it on Amazon and have them ship it to the dorm than it is to have it sent to your parents' house and drive it up there. And so, yeah, these offices are full of not just like small boxes with pens and pencils.
So again, I don't know. I'm not saying this is all anecdotal. So don't quote me on that.
Does any of this have an impact on?
I'm sorry.
Does any of this have an impact on Amazon coming into the state?
In what?
Are they open in South Windsor?
Yeah, they have a shipping facility
They're
here.
coming to Wallingford, I think.
They have look. I think the way to approach this problem is working together with industry, in the same way that we're doing currently with. Did I put down battery recycling?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is that down? Household battery recycling. So. What we did with microbeads, and now there's a federal law that bans microbeads. But when we were working on our microbead legislation, we brought together, Colgate Palmolive, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, some of the largest manufacturers of these products that contain microbeads, and we said, hey, listen, let's work together to try to figure out how to do this, okay? And we worked together to craft a bill that was really the model for the federal legislation, the microbead legislation here in Connecticut. So the same is happening right now in terms of single-use batteries. You know, the state we don't have the capacity or the resources, DEEP doesn't, to implement a battery recycling, program in Connecticut. But we have been meeting over the last year with the manufacturers of probably those that represent about 70%, the Duracells, Eveready, Rayovacs of the world, working together, trying to figure out, okay, now how are we going to do this together? And maybe the state would kind of bless an extended producer responsibility program, but let the industry figure out what they know how to retrieve, they know how to collect, they know how to reuse. So the idea here is to work together to try to find the most administratively simple way to implement, for example, a battery recycling program. One of the easiest ways would be, to obviously be able to put the batteries in that little blue container in front of your house, okay, as part of the single stream. That may or may not be feasible, okay, but that would be good to eliminate those products from the waste stream, and also they have value at the end of their life. There's actually elements in household batteries that can be reused and recycled.
I know the Water Authority.
Pardon me?
They have the Water Authority. They collect batteries.
So they collect batteries, yeah. So there's people doing it, and so the idea is let's try to figure out. I mean, Ontario has a big battery recycling program. There are other municipalities and states around the country that are also dealing with this issue. So, the idea again is to work together with industry. They're eager to work together. I see a lot of these industries, whether you're talking about paints or tires, we're trying to figure out, is there an end use for tires? We generate about 3.5 million used tires in Connecticut every year. Again, this is a municipal problem. CCM, which is the Conference of Municipalities, endorsed this bill. Why? Because they're stuck with having to go around and collect these these tires that are littering the streets and rivers and streams, etc., that are dumped there. So again, the idea is to work together with these recyclers, together with these tire manufacturers, to craft a solution that is going to be a lot easier for the state to essentially oversee the problem.
Speaking of used tires, an issue we're hearing more and more about is athletic fields that use the crumb rubber tires.
Yes.
It's come up in a lot of our local towns.
Yes.
What do you think the state's role should be in? So far, the state seems to have said, "Hey, this is okay." Does that worry you?
Personally, I don't like the crumb rubber athletic fields. I think that it does pose a public health hazard to the students who play on those fields. But that's really a decision for the local municipality, I think, to make. There is some talk in the legislature, for example, to say that we're not going to allow any state bond funds to be used to construct turf fields. That's one idea that I've heard kicking around, because as you may know, a lot of these athletic fields or these towns and schools, they're expensive to install. I've heard, personally in Branford, we have, our fields have been maintained organically for almost 20 years. They're beautiful. Personally, the last term, we did have a bill that came out of the Environment Committee that tried to extend the ban on pesticides and herbicides in 9 through 12. So currently, you cannot use pesticides and herbicides on athletic fields in K through 8. So we were unable to do that because a lot of athletic directors and boosters of athletic programs really, insist on being able to use pesticides and herbicides. So, but what we did do is pass a very strong parental notification law. So right now, parents will be notified. Parents are going to be notified by email. It's going to be posted on the school website, on the Board of Education website, about what the pest management plan is for that school. So in my view, the next best thing to eliminating the use of these products is to inform parents, and so that they know, because parents have no idea right now the extent to which toxic chemicals are used on their school property.
Can I ask you something that's kind of along the same lines that isn't on this list and might not be on your radar screen, but it occurred to me yesterday when we had a story about Yale put out a study yesterday about the health conditions that can result from exposure to fracking wastewater and the toxins in fracking. So we all know there's not fracking going on in Connecticut now, but there is concern raised by environmentalists and kind of brought up in this story about the Yale study. Could this fracking wastewater be brought to Connecticut someday? And
I think there was
There was-
legislation
there was-
what your
last,
thoughts are about that?
There was a ban passed on bringing fracking waste in Connecticut the year before you came in.
the year
Yeah.
before.
But it didn't pass the whole.
No, I think it did.
I think it did.
Yeah, okay, so.
Yeah,
thought it
so
didn't
I don't
pass the-
anticipate that is going to be an issue for
All right, so
Connecticut,
that's good
because
to
I
know.
think, I think there was a law passed the session before I got there
Yeah,
regarding
check, 'cause I
fracking
didn't
waste.
think that it
But we
did.
Dan can get you the.
I think it was one of the passed the House the last night of session, but it passed Senate a while before, if my recollection. But I definitely thought it passed. So I'll check on that and get back to you on it, but I'm pretty sure it did.
Thank you. Thanks.
Did we
Yeah.
cover one of the arguments I've heard in favor of the turf fields is that in a lot of our center cities, they don't have the number of athletic fields like we have like on the shoreline. So the fields get used very intensely, meaning that, as soon as one soccer game ends, there's another group of kids jumping right on the soccer game field. And that because there's more students and fewer number of fields, that leads to a lot of the fields being used quite a lot. And that you cannot sustain a regular grass or turf field. Again, I don't know to the extent of which that is true, but those are frequently the arguments that are used to bolster the use of these turf fields.
The idea you mentioned there's talk about not allowing bond funds for
Yes.
these fields. Is that something you support or something you want to learn more about?
Well, I would, I think that that's worth having a discussion about. Many of these fields are, that municipalities build, look to the state to offset some or all of the cost of these, because they cost quite a lot to install. So that would be, I think that's up for discussion. I can't say whether or not there's going to be legislation brought up on that point, but I think there's a lot of people who've been talking about the turf field issue for a long time, even before I got there. And I would have to look at, where it's gone. A lot of this is, sometimes these issues are raised in the Education Committee or in the Children's Committee, the Environment Committee. What you find is that there's multiple bills that more or less do the same thing or similar things that originate in different committees. And, I find it helpful to actually read the testimony and read these, what are called the JF reports, the Joint Favorable Reports, which are a summary of all the people who showed up pro and con and of a bill, and tells you who they are, what they said in like 2 or 3 sentences. So they're very good for people who need to absorb a lot of information. And then you can kind of decipher, okay, this is was taken up, for example, we had a single-use plastic bag initiative last year. You can study, okay, who were the people who kind of lined up for this and against this the last time in these various committees? What was the committee vote? Gives you a little bit of a flavor of, what you can anticipate when you bring up an issue like this in the future. So I would be interested in knowing kind of what may have been done before on this whole issue of turf fields and crumb rubber on turf fields. Yes?
Sorry about that. I know you said you guys passed a strong parental notification if
Yes.
it's on athletic field. Does that also stand for playgrounds? Because I know there's a playground. I think the school is A.W. Cox in Guilford,
Yes.
and they replaced their wood chips with that. So they have that all over the playgrounds, like it kind of ground up.
Oh, really?
Stuff like that. So is it the same thing for playgrounds or just the athletic fields like that?
I don't know to answer. I mean, the short answer to the question is I know that there's some sort of the rubbery surface that a lot of these playgrounds use. Are you saying there's like crumb rubber?
Yeah, they're using that instead of wood chips.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Tracks.
I didn't know that.
And the notification bill was about pesticides, not these.
Yeah, the
okay.
the notification bill was, and it was extended to municipal playgrounds as well. The original bill, I was trying to extend the ban on pesticides and herbicides to town greens. As we know, I don't know what town everybody lives in, but in the communities that I serve, there's tons of activities. There's dogs, there's little kids, there's festivals almost every weekend. There are, a lot of people out on these town greens. So we were unable to do that. We were unable to get enough consensus around extending the pesticide and herbicide ban on the town greens across the state.
Can you tell me what single-use plastic bags is? I don't know what does that mean?
Single-use plastic bags we use about 1 billion with a B.
Grocery bag.
Pardon me?
Grocery bags.
I know what they are. I mean, I don't
Yes.
understand what single-use means.
Single use is that they're most of them are only used once, okay? And we had a bill last session that proposed to put a 5-cent fee on single-use plastic bags. It did pass the Judiciary Committee, the Planning and Development Committee, and the Environment Committee, but it was somewhat controversial. We did have a carve out for individuals on public assistance. That was a main concern for many people. So anyone on food assistance or public assistance would not have to pay that 5-cent fee. But we projected, and this is not my projections, this is the Office of Fiscal Analysis, OFA, did a projection that at 5 cents a bag, that would generate over $20 million a year to the state. Because if you think about it, if it's 1 billion bags, 5 cents a bag, that's $50 million a year. But if you look at Montgomery County, the District of Columbia, for example, instituted a 5-cent fee recently on their single-use plastic bags. It passed unanimously in the city council. But what was unique about the District of Columbia is they said this money is going to go into a special dedicated fund that's going to be used to clean up the Anacostia River and the environment of the District of Columbia. And with that, it's been a tremendous success. There's been, whenever you do even just like a 5-cent fee, you see about a 50% reduction in the use of single-use plastic bags, because grocers are giving these things away now, and the only town that has banned single-use plastic bags in Connecticut is Westport. But if you look at the experience, some of these other, particularly Montgomery County, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. You look at some of these different places, and it was something that I thought would be a good proposal because, number one, it's a way to reduce single-use plastic bags, which are clogging our landfills, ending up in the ocean. They're terrible for the environment. The grocers actually came out in favor of this bill, the grocer manufacturers. These are the Stop and Shops, Big Y, etc. They came out in favor of my bill. However, the retailers, the other retailers, the trade association representing them, opposed the bill. And so this year, I think, we might take a different approach. We may look at something like trying to address the content of single-use plastic bags, because there's multiple types of plastics that are used in single-use plastic bags. Some of them biodegrade very quickly, others biodegrade very slowly. So that might be.
Some are recyclable, aren't they?
Pardon me?
Some of them can be recyclable.
Yeah, some of them are.
I think they're all recyclable.
Well, the issue is since there's a couple different kinds, you can't co-mix different types of plastic and different, like you can't put certain types of plastic bags in with other types of plastic bags because they're two different types of plastic. So again, my whole thing is working together with, industry to try to address, and we did. We worked and we had let them keep a part of the fee in order to give these, free bags, reusable bags to people. And, I was, what happened at the end of the session. We were looking for, millions, a couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there, and it seemed like this was a way to, this was literally $20 million a year in a
So
way to.
you're gonna bring it up again this year?
Well, again, I'm not sure if we're going to bring up the exact same content. I'm really looking to try to get results, and I want to try to figure out what we can do to minimize the use of single-use plastic bags, increase the recycling of single-use plastic bags. Look, I would love to create a dedicated fund to help environmental issues in our state, to help our state parks, for example, to help our urban areas that need a tremendous amount of help in our urban environmental areas, fisheries and hatcheries. I was able to secure Republican support because some of this money could be targeted to things like the fish hatcheries and for pheasant stocking and other and things like state parks. Our state parks are crumbling, and my committee is in charge has jurisdiction over our state parks, and it's not an understatement to say that there's a crisis in our state park system.
So given in the fish hatcheries, in my experience, they're always the first to go when the budget gets tough in Connecticut. Let's get rid of the fish hatcheries, and the parks are the next. Let's stop putting money in the parks. So what do you think should be done, or what do you think in the next session you might propose doing?
So, I had this idea to try to, under my bill, like $9 million a year would have gone into the state park system.
From the bags.
From the bags. I felt like if you can explain it to people, I wanted to essentially create an environmental lockbox. Okay, but what happened? Have you heard of the lockbox?
Not the lockbox.
Well, essentially, for lack of a better way of conceptualizing it, because I think that people will accept these, will accept it, like as I just said, in the District of Columbia. People grumbled about having to pay an extra nickel, but they were confident when they knew the money was going to go into cleaning up the environment. And then now if you poll people, they're incredibly excited, and the results have been unbelievable, right? So we have a problem with our one of the problems that we have in our state park system is it's funded entirely under the general fund. The state parks are experiencing the same thing in nearly every state. And I've read the reports from California, Arizona, New Mexico, Washington State. You know, I had another bill last year to have a $5 from your car registration go into a special fund to help the state parks. That was an idea that was offered in Washington State. It generated about $50 million a year. You know, so there are many different ideas that you can have about, you know, your license plate becoming your park pass for the, you know, for the state parks. One issue that we're looking at is what I have here on the second to last bullet, this alternative funding mechanism. So what you have, essentially, there are these friends groups, and thank goodness there are. If you've been out to like Hammonasset recently, I mean, there's a lot, all of that, the Meg's Point, the Ranger Russ, a lot of those are the result of these groups of people who become the friends of state parks, and they adopt these parks, and then they fundraise and they do everything, right? And they really provide a tremendous amount of support. But the issue, one of the issues that I've heard is, well, Ted, if you start creating like a dedicated fund from plastic bags, $9 million going into the state parks, what's going to prevent a future governor from saying, okay, well, that means we can, because the entire state parks budget is $18 million. So they're just going to subtract that and take that $9 million and say, thank you, we're going to use that money for something else, right? So one of the things, the challenges that we have is to try to find alternative funding mechanisms for our state parks, especially the Sherwood Island, Hammonasset, other state parks that are really highly used. That's what we're looking at right now in terms of things like concessions for our state parks, canoe rentals, weddings. I mean, Gillette Castle, you know how much it costs to have a wedding at Gillette Castle?
$50.
$150.
Oh,
Really?
Well,
I think that's rather cheap, no?
yeah.
well, that's what I'm saying is that you know, there's a lacrosse tournament that happens in. Are any of you lacrosse parents? I want to make sure I don't say anything. There's a lacrosse tournament that happens at Hammonasset. You know, right after, you know, they have the gate. The gate now you can drive to Hammonasset and go in there, and you don't pay anything to go in there. But I mean, one alternative. One alternative was to extend the gate to the shoulder seasons, right, in the fall and the spring. I'm not saying I'm pro or against any of these. My thought is we need to get all the ideas on the table, right? We need to get every idea, including, you know, some people are like, well, you're going to allow a vendor, like, Starbucks, to come into Hammonasset State Park, and I'm like, well, you know, maybe I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea.
Sure.
What?
I want Starbucks.
Well, you can buy coffee now, except that it's watery and it's not hot, right? So I'm just.
You can't get a hot dog.
Now, you know, there's a different. Again, I'm not saying that I would be for or against this, but I think that we need to at least have a debate. There's one issue about, you know, premium parking, okay, at state parks. If you try to get into Hammonasset State Park on 4th of July weekend, unless you're there by 10 in the morning, you can't park, okay? And there's some people who've suggested, well, you know, maybe we should charge people for a premium parking place. Now, of course, that kind of goes against the, you know, the egalitarian ethic of our that we've had traditionally in our state park system, right? But, you know, again, I'm not saying I'm for or against, you know, charging premium parking, but I think we need to have a discussion about how to, and look to what other states have done perhaps. And right now, it's interesting because the last session, we passed a law that required DEEP to issue an RFP to different vendors throughout the country, because there are vendors who come in and they run a lot of different concessions, camping, canoes, restaurant concessions, etc. So we basically said, we don't know. We really don't know what we may turn out. There may not be anybody who responds to the RFP, right? So then we've kind of gotten our answer. But there may be, companies out there that have ideas about how we can make, our state parks more of a, destination, and people know they can get a good food there, and there's other activities, rent a sailboat on the beach, do this and that. We have no idea, right? So I think that one of the things we at the Gillette. Assets.
So there are
And
We don't want to do that.
of course not. Of course not. So that's just the
$20
issue.
to get into salmon acid, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, you're already paying X amount of dollars, and I don't know, the thought of premium parking because you have more money is kind of, you get the park up front, but because we're poor, we have to walk
Well, that's
miles.
just exactly.
It's
Exactly.
kind of-
Well, that's just the issue,
That would
right?
be an editorial I should.
Really?
Oh, man.
I think
So-
my opinion though, the vendor thing's a great idea.
Yeah, food trucks.
Well, so
The food trucks will be wonderful, things like that.
Because salmon acid doesn't have any concessions, it just has machines.
Yeah, machines, that's all.
so anyway, I'm not saying I'm like
No,
for or against. I think it would be interesting to see what are the types of things that would be proposed, okay? And then maybe we ultimately say, right now, if you're over 65, you can get a free park pass, okay? If you're a veteran, a combat veteran, you can get a free pass to all the state parks.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So, basically, right now, if you literally think about who is actually using these state parks, and people, they get the station wagon, they put grandma in the front seat, they drive out to, I hope I'm not being.
Grandma doesn't mind.
Grandma in the
Watch it for
front
this long.
and say, come on, grandma, where do we go? We're going to the state park. They leave her in the car all day. No, so, look, I'm just trying to take a fresh look at these, how we're going to, because let's face it, we're in a new era right now where I do think that we need to look at, things in a new way. We can't just have the same old way of doing things in Connecticut. We need to think creatively about And maybe enhance the state park experience as well. So I don't know. One other things, I've been doing a lot of talking. I want to
Can you talk about this ivory ban?
the Ivory Band. You haven't heard about the Ivory Band?
Isn't that a federal ban?
No. What?
Is it the same as the federal ban?
No, it's not the same as the federal ban. We've had a federal Ivory Ban for years. Last year, we had a piece of legislation to essentially New Jersey and New York have now banned the sale of ivory, including all ivory products, even antique ivory, things like scrimshaw, musical instruments that contain ivory and the like. It was fairly controversial, but I do think that we're going to have some sort of ivory legislation this year to, the recognition that even though a lot of there's a ban on new ivory, but evidently it's really hard to tell the difference between new ivory and old ivory. So that's the issue. So it would make it impossible for somebody who has, say, an ivory piece to sell that in the state of
Well,
Connecticut.
can you explain why that would be important? Because the question would be, and I'm secretly I'm all for this, but why would me selling the piece of scrimshaw that my grandmother gave me years ago affect what's happening to the ivory bearing
That's
animals?
that's a very good question, and there's a number of people who raised that very same question in the committee, and I think the response was largely it's the creation of an ivory market. In essence. Now, we had people testify from the Wadsworth, Mystic Seaport, and other museums that talked about, their collections. There's extensive collections, especially places like Mystic Seaport. And again, these are from, the 1870s, 80s, these, whale teeth and ivory scrimshaw pieces. So it's unclear exactly what form the ivory legislation is going to take, but I think we're going to most likely see another ivory bill. And if I had to guess, it would probably be modeled on what the state of New Jersey recently did.
And the intent is to just make it clear to everyone, we want to cut off any market for ivory whatsoever.
Yes.
The ripple effect will be cutting off this dreadful thing that's going on all over the world. with
That's
killing
what
these animals.
that's the intent. Yeah. Again, there's some antique furniture that has little ivory buttons. There's we heard testimony from people who own musical instruments. We heard testimony from people who own old guns. That there's a lot of ivory that's in the gun handles and whatnot that the law would potentially impact, although there could be a trigger where it's a percentage if it's less than 20% or something like that. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific because I don't really know how this is all going to shake out, but I do think this got a lot of people's attention. In the sense that we need to be doing something about the ivory.
Is there a black market in pianos then?
Well, of course, in Ivoryton, how the
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have
Ivoryton,
to change the name of Ivoryton.
Ivoryton got its name because Ivoryton was probably the number one. I mean, if you hear the amount of tons of ivory that went through
The
Ivoryton.
town that elephants built.
Pardon me?
The town that elephants built.
The town that elephants built. Yeah. So what? Well,
History.
yeah. So I think again, I think there was. I referenced here the House bill that we took up last year. In case you want to kind of type that in, and there were some amendments on that. I think that we're probably going to see something on that.
Where are we at with the Negro heads?
The Negro heads.
Yes.
Well, I heard that what you guys are like maybe willing to like publish a winning essay or something like that. Is that what I heard from the? Pardon me.
You suggested you have
So
an essay contest.
okay,
and we
so
did
this
it.
is all off the record because I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm not going to say anything like controversial or like you know, secret. I'm just telling you kind of where things stand right now. So, you know, and trying to make lemonade out of lemons. So I spoke to Hamlet Hernandez, who's the superintendent of schools in Branford, and I asked him, listen, would the school be interested in doing a naming contest? Okay, 250-word essay from the school, open to any school child in Branford to offer a name, to change the name. And he is very excited about that because he views this as kind of like a teachable moment. I've spoken to Stephanie Farber, who's the president of the Branford Community Foundation, and asked her, would the Branford Community Foundation be willing to offer like a scholarship, a modest $500 to $1,000 scholarship for college to the winning essay contest winner? And she said yes. Jane Booley, who's the town historian in Branford, has agreed to serve on the committee. Now, I don't want to serve on the committee because, like, why do I want to pick, like, the winning essay? Now, that's, no, you disappoint, like, hundreds of people, and that's not what, that's not what. Exactly. So, but the idea here, and then, we have a Branford, again, I'm just kind of making this up. Then we have like a Branford festival. You've been to the Branford Festival? You live in Branford, right? So you know the Branford Festival. What?
Really? Sung there.
You've sung there.
Last
So
year.
we have a Branford Festival in June where they have, hundreds and hundreds of people there in a sound stage and all that. And I'm envisioning, envisioning that that's where like the winner can be like named, and then the woman who's the state geologist. So the state has said yes, we want to change the name. Okay, they're not holding anything at this point. They are waiting for Branford to actually recommend a name. So on the state naming board, I don't have the exact name, but it's a geographic naming board or something like that. There's like 8 people. There's a public safety person, because evidently when you rename, you got to get the fire and police to, you change a name, then, no one knows where the hell to go and all that.
Isn't it an aid to navigation too?
Well, that's
So-
right. So I think you'd need to have, in addition to the 3 people that I just mentioned, okay, Hamlet, Stephanie, and Jane Booley. I'm thinking about kind of replicating, in other words, the committee that's at the state that would, they want a historian, they have a librarian, they want a public safety person. So almost replicating that. And then I want to get maybe a couple of authors there who will be the ones who actually, read these like hundreds of essays and can make a determination. And then we don't know what's going to happen. They have certain rules at the state. For example, if you are going to name it after somebody who died, they have to be dead at least 5 years. And they have a couple of, like, which I didn't know, but they have,
you learn.
So they have a couple of different things. But the idea is to make it like, let's do something like that. So I think, Dan, who did you speak to? I reached out to you guys. Oh, you had. Because I thought it would be great to have like a,
I talked to Helen, and Helen said we could be.
So anyway, here's the idea.
I did.
The idea is that would the paper publish the winning essay
Yeah,
or something like
absolutely.
that?
Yeah.
And then that kind of makes it like,
Nice for the kids.
it's
Yeah.
nice for the kids, they get their name,
So the idea is,
Name,
in
the
the
picture,
essay, they
paper.
tell why their idea for a name should be the name.
Exactly,
You know what
exactly.
would be ironic?
What?
We have the Blackstone Library in
Yeah.
Branford. What if they named it the Blackstone?
Well, they could name it, it's not up to me to decide. I don't want to even be anywhere in, involved in this. My goal would just to be like what I've done. I've tried to assemble like a committee, and you get, people who are, objective, and people in the community. The librarian of the Blackstone, I want to ask Karen to be, because, so she can, librarians love to do this kind of thing, help people with their history projects, et cetera. Do you know what I'm saying? And then you get the whole town, you're laughing. You don't think this is a good
I think it's great. I think it's great.
I think it's a good idea. And you guys,
It's brilliant.
I asked you, because I know you wrote an editorial on it, so I'm like, okay, the Register seems like they'd be behind something like this. What?
We publish it on our editorial page.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and and then the idea is, then the name is you have kids, and again, Hamlet is excited because you get the teachers and you get all these kids, researching Branford history and what would be appropriate. You're going to have, I think, a lot of really creative ideas, I think.
We could even probably runner-ups.
Yeah.
You may do
That'd be
runner-ups.
great, yeah.
You may
They're
do-
only 250 words, so you could probably run
Well, if you-
Yeah, that's-
Well, I think you'd only have to have
Yes,
one,
that's-
only allow one entry per person.
Oh, no, you
So
say,
you say we can run, you have the
second place,
winner,
yeah.
and you have the
Winner,
winner. on the
I'm
second,
not
third,
like
fourth
trying to determine how to run the essay contest. Okay?
I think that'd be great, though.
I just think,
They'd love that.
I wanted to have like the Branford School System, then the Community Foundation, and on the board of the Community Foundation is basically like, who's who of the business and, civic community of
Get
Branford.
Frank Carano involved.
Get Frank, people, I think he may even be on the board of the Community Foundation, so.
Maybe.
So, and then you just let them, I haven't spoken to the Branford Festival people, but, ask them if they wanted to make the announcement at the, and you know what I'm saying.
Can I ask you a political question?
Yeah,
So
sure.
You have a family that might know a little bit about politics, but this is your first foray into elective office. You've been in a year now.
Yeah.
Any surprises?
Any surprises about,
Just, is there, being from, a storied political family,
But I
now
wanted-
you've been in a year, is there stuff that you're like, wow, I didn't expect that?
well, there's been a couple of observations. One, we talked about before, which is the process, the legislative process. That was a surprise to me. In terms of, how the budget is developed and a lot of the things that happen at the last minute. So that was, but I think what I'm mostly, surprised by is just the amount of like civic engagement that there is in the communities that I represent, because there are so many community organizations and community activists, and it's really amazing. I mean, the people who are the volunteerism, the sense of engagement, and I get a lot of. I have one aide. Okay, now I knew it was going to be tough, right, for me to be able to respond and do everything with one aide. Because I get, 250 emails a day, probably 50 phone calls a day, and it's really more, honestly, than one, human being can respond to. And a lot of the issues that I am presented with are the result of other governmental agencies just not responding to that person. So if a person, it's a veteran that needs help, or somebody needs Medicaid, or somebody's trying to get on the exchange, or they have a mother in a nursing home, or they're at DMV and they're waiting for, 3 days at DMV, they finally give up, and who do they call? They call me. And then it's a lot. So do you see what I'm saying? A lot of it is just trying to intercede and try to break through.
Yeah.
Break through the bureaucracy. So when the government doesn't really function efficiently, and people are on hold and wait and all this, they can't get an answer. A lot of the time, then I end up having to deal with those. So I'm dealing with quite a lot, actually.
Do you feel that there, because of your background and your family and so forth, that there's more pressure on you as a Kennedy to produce because of that long line of,
Well,
or I should say, is more expected of you?
well,
because you're this.
I've dealt with people's expectations, my whole
Yeah,
life.
probably.
And, in many ways, I waited to really,
I was going to ask you, that. Why did you wait
I
so
waited to really make sure, I've been living in Branford for, 20 years. I've been here since 1989, not including the time I spent at Wesleyan, so went to UConn Law, went to the Yale Forestry School, and went to Wesleyan. So I've been spending a lot of time in Connecticut. And, I wanted to really wait, honestly, until my children were a little older because pardon me?
You remember the?
Well,
the
I think that it's really hard to do this job and be an active parent. I mean, there are people who do it, but I don't know how. To me, that would be too much of a sacrifice to make. So now my daughter is a senior at Wesleyan, and my son's a senior in high school, and they've got their own lives, and so I felt, and then of course there was the open seat. Ed Meyer decided to retire, so.
He was pretty out there in terms of had a real public face, so that you were following somebody who people
Yeah,
probably called along to.
And it's a very intimate experience being in the state legislature, because you really get to know these activists and your neighbors and the community organizations, and I really like that, actually. You're not. By training, I'm a healthcare lawyer. I still have a full-time job. I don't, I work at a law firm called Epstein Becker Green, so I practice healthcare law. And the legislature is a part-time job, right? So it's really hard to juggle both the state legislature and another job. But I think that's actually it's actually a healthy thing to have. It really is kind of like a citizens legislature. I mean, a lot of people say that, but for example, in the Environment Committee, there's one of the members comes to work in a FedEx outfit. He's a FedEx driver. He drives all night long. He shows up in his FedEx outfit, not every day, but a lot of times. And you have restaurant owners. Yes, you have a lot of lawyers and whatnot. You have small business people, and I think you do get a lot of perspective from the input from people who have had real lives, who can bring their experience to their to the legislative process. So. I love my job. I think it's great because in a state like Connecticut, you can really get things done. Despite a lot of things that you hear about partisanship and gridlock, with a few exceptions that you kind of read about and then they're highlighted in the media, we're all work together pretty collaboratively. I'm very impressed with the quality of the people who are serving in the Connecticut General Assembly. Most people are there for the right reason. They want to be helpful, and we're all there making, away from sometimes very late nights, away from our families and whatnot, but I really get the sense that people are there because they really are trying to improve the lives of people in Connecticut. So, I'm very optimistic and confident that we have our challenges in the state, but I'm very confident that we're going to be able to address those and make it through, because I think that we have the key ingredients that we have in this state are just unbelievable. The educated workforce, the incredible environment that we have, the world-class universities, the the proximity to Boston and New York, we have, the really incredible resources. Can we improve on that? Yes. I think we need to tap in and be smarter and come up with fresh ideas about how we're going to move forward in the future.
Are you gonna run again when your term is up?
Well, I can't say that right now, because as soon as I make an announcement, then I'm technically a candidate for public office.
Does it interest you?
Tell us.
But I would be interested, yes, in continuing to serve.
So after having had a first-hand taste of elective office, do you look down the road at all at a national level office? Do you ever think about Congress, or is it way too soon for that?
Well,
Is Rosa ever going to retire?
I've really just, honestly, I was sworn in less than like a
Less than a year
ago.
ago.
Yeah, about like a year. So it's hard, a lot has happened in the last year, but I figure, I really love my job right now, because I really feel like I can make an impact. I get to chair a committee, which means that I have a lot of responsibility. And I think that serving in the state legislature is actually a huge responsibility. There are so many areas of the law that impact people's lives that are really done at the state level. We tend to focus at the national level or at the municipal level, but the state level really has an incredible impact on environmental issues, education issues. The list goes, criminal justice, things like civil rights and marriage equality and all of this is happening at the state level. So I think when other parts of government, like in Washington, D.C., are just so gridlocked, I think serving, all the action politically is now in the state legislatures across the country. So, I'll have to see. I don't know what, the future will bring, but, but in the meanwhile, I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing.
Anything else, anybody? No? Well, thank you very much. We
Oh, you're
appreciate your
welcome.
time.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
your-
How often do you get together? Do you get together with all the, how often do you get together?
Well, it depends. Earlier this week, we met with the head of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, so, depending on the time of year, a couple times a week.
Yeah, the governor's been in a couple times in the
Yeah.
last year.
Is that Joe Chryskula? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah, Sarasota,
Sarasota,
Yeah. So I worked with him on the